before we get into those stories, why don't you tell us a little bit what is pseudoscience and how it compares to science? Like, what is the problem, let's say, with pseudoscience? Why can't we allow pseudoscience to just exist in culture, let's say, or history?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So pseudoscience is essentially just fake science. It's pseudo science, it's pretend science.
Mm-hmm.
So, and really to understand that, or really to uh, grasp that, it might be easier to talk about what science is first.
Mm-hmm.
The most basic description of science I've ever heard is that it's just a systematic way for carefully and thoroughly observing nature and then using consistent logic to evaluate the results or what you observe. And so there's a lot more to science than that, but that's a really basic, fundamental way of describing science. And so pseudoscience just happens essentially when people pretend to do the science. More specifically, it's usually sloppy application of the description I just gave. So people often refuse to be systematic, or maybe they're not very careful, or they're not thorough in their observations. And sometimes they're just blatant about it. They usually, because doing so eliminates conclusions they've already formed, and they want science to agree with them. So ultimately, they fail to use the consistent logic to evaluate the results or describe their observations. Very often, people who have pseudoscientific points of view, they already have a conclusion. That's where they start. They're looking for data that fit those conclusions while ignoring that data which are contradictory or unsupporting. So a good example in South American archaeology might be concluding or believing, like you mentioned earlier, believing really strongly that some advanced civilization existed in the Americas before native peoples, or maybe during native peoples, or helped them. Then to support that conclusion, they find anomalies or artifacts that are seemingly out of place, things like stones that are too large or too perfect for indigenous peoples to create or move, or little gold pendants that resemble aircraft or spaceships. And then some might say, well, what's the harm in letting people believe what they want? And I think there's, to some degree, there's something to be said for that. The problem really is that the deeper it goes, the more insidious the claims really become. Instead of just Uncle Joe, who likes to think about, he likes to think aliens built Pumapunku, we end up with people taking trips to these places and disturbing genuine archaeological sites, or encouraging locals to loot or desecrate graves. And worse, these claims are often racist in their core. Indigenous peoples and descendant communities, you're not given the credit for the accomplishments. And instead, claims of Atlanteans or Vikings or Europeans are substituted, ostensibly because the locals are too primitive to do it themselves, or they couldn't have done it without help. And a lot of times, what's really gets me is that sometimes the racism kind of comes full circle on itself in a way that's really complex. In Peru, for instance, they have huaqueros, and these are looters who will desecrate tombs of their own ancestors because that's what's paying right now. Mm-hmm. And for me, the archaeologist, I look like the bad guy. If I were to walk in and say, "Hey, you can't do that," they're like, "Wait, it's our stuff." Mm-hmm. So really, there's an ethical fine line in there. In a way, it really is their stuff. Mm. But what's happening is the people who buy those artifacts, they're the and this is really outside the realm of pseudoscience, but those folks that are buying those artifacts, those are they're perpetuating really what's keeping those folks down. So really, the big money, people are making literally billions of dollars off of looted artifacts throughout the world, but not the people who are actually digging them out of the ground, that kind of thing. Exactly. But there's a lot of other stuff going on too. That you get people coming in and they want to find, you know, these skulls that are elongated and things like that, or they want to measure, you know, Pumapunku, and you know, that kind of, they perpetuate this whole thing that, well, you guys couldn't have done that, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna, when you were talking, I was thinking, you mentioned the word tours, I think, and it reminded me that there's like there's like a market for,
Yeah,
you know, like you make some stuff up, like let's say, well, we can talk, for example, one of the main ones I would say is the skulls of Paracas, where there is all this story about them not being human and having, you know, other like features that are not the normal skull features and stuff.
yeah.
So they make something up and sell it to people who pay for the tour to go see, and then they explain to them with all these fake stories. And then people if someone like you comes and tells them, no, these things are normal, this is, you know, this is nothing special, then like you said, you become the bad guy. But let's talk about the skulls, since we're in the on the subject.
Sure.
What I've heard is that the Peruvians in some parts of the country, they had in their ancient culture, they had elongated skulls. So what's the story with the elongated skulls?
Well, the thing about the elongated skulls, it's part of a practice of artificial cranial modification, head shaping. People modify the head, the skull, and it's something that occurs all over the world on every populated continent. The only place it doesn't occur is Antarctica, only continent. It doesn't. And if there were people there, it probably would happen.
Yeah.
But it happens all throughout time, possibly as early as the Neanderthals. There's various ways to modify the skull of a living person. You can, it could be simple dental changes. They could sharpen teeth, or they could add teeth where teeth are missing. Those are, you know, if you get a dental implant, that's a cranial modification. Whereas piercing the ear isn't, you know, because it doesn't really modify the skull. It just modifies the skin on the skull.
Mm-hmm.
Other things are like trephination, which they did in Peru. Lots of trephination. They were actually using that to relieve and help people who had injuries, and they recovered from their wounds. We have skulls that show trephination, that is the bones remodeled and the people live to be older. And the other is,
sorry, let me interrupt you for a second. So earlier we were talking about advanced, like how people think that these civilizations were not advanced, and yet they were doing trepanations, which is incredible. Please continue. I just want to.
I mean, these are, and this is a culture that existed maybe 500, 800 AD, the current era. So in this time frame. So this is after, this is within the last 1,000 years that this existed. So they were very advanced. They had a system of writing that was through textiles rather than a pen to paper. You know, they didn't have paper, but they could create textiles and save stories that way.
Yeah.
So this was a very advanced culture, and the fact that they could do brain surgery is just amazing, and they used antiseptics for that as well.
Wow.
And the other thing about a cranial modification is obviously influencing the shape of the skull, and again, that practice happens all over the world at different times, different periods, different places. But it's really common in Andean cultures, pre-Columbian Andean cultures, like in Peru, and we see it in the archaeological records, you know, pretty vividly. It is a very strange and alien custom, and not alien in the sense of otherworldly, but but alien is being foreign or incomprehensible. It's something that we can't imagine doing. And the reason is because you have to do it. You have to wrap the skull of a toddler, of your own child, very tightly with boards or rocks or just head bindings. And you're forcing that child's skull into an unnatural shape. And this is something that we just wouldn't think of doing in modern Western culture, but it's something that was very accepted. And actually, it was pretty common in some Melanesian cultures in the 19th and 20th century. It was still being done.
Interesting.
There is a certain tour guide based in Peru, like you mentioned, tours. And he's put a lot of claims out over the years about what he thinks is going on with elongated skulls. And they're all completely false, the claims that he makes, which is really amazing. And I find it really hard to believe he doesn't know these claims are false. One of the bigger ones is the cranial capacity, he says, is far greater than humans, or that the skulls are heavier, and they really aren't. The skulls of these people, if you can imagine, for instance, you have a pound of clay, and I have a pound of clay, and we're both given a task to create something, and you create something that's kind of small. Well, your clay, let's say you create a pot, and the pot was small. Pot, and the pot was big. Well, we both had a pound of clay. So naturally, the bigger pot is going to have thinner walls. Well, this is kind of what happens with the skull as well. So you can create larger or extended versions of the skull, but you're still dealing with the same volume of bone, and the walls will be thinner, a little bit elongated, but you're still looking at the same cranial capacity in the end. And this was actually measured. There was a guy, Samuel George Morton, back in the 19th century. He collected skulls his notion was also pseudoscientific, and it's been disproven. But it's interesting. His data was actually interesting. His notion was that he could prove cranial capacity among white people was greater than that of people of color. So he was. This was a racial. This is scientific racism is what we would call it today. But this is a guy who had a hypothesis, and he was testing it, but his data didn't bear it out. He found that the elongated skulls had the same cranial capacity on average as non-elongated skulls, and the using Morton's data, I looked at it, and the mean cranial capacity was 1,277 cc's. So the largest that he had was 1,655 cc's. It was a 70-year-old male skull of a guy who was from Arica in Peru. And he had, I forget exactly how many skulls that he collected. I think it was 34 or 35 skulls total. And some were from Pisco, Peru. Some were from, I'm going to brutalize the name, Pachacamac, I think. And Arc is actually in Chile. So these are all within maybe 1,000 kilometers of Paracas, so these are all skulls that the same kind of skulls that Brian Forster talks about. And later he also says, Brian Forster, this tour guide, named tour guide, he does say that these skulls haven't been studied since 1928. And I suspect he's talking about maybe Samuel Morton. But I think I think Samuel Morton was actually studying these in the 19th century. So I'm not sure why he claims that the skulls haven't been studied, because there is lots and lots of data in the last 20 years 30 years on these types of skulls, and people are interested in them not because archaeologists are interested in them not necessarily because they're alien, but because it does tell us a little bit about people and where people are from and where they migrate to. So in Indian cultures, Tiwanaku was a center, a very cosmopolitan region.
Mm-hmm.
We have two types of skull shapes in general that are found there. One is an elongated skull from front to back.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is from front to back, but spread out left and right obliquely, so that it's kind of flattened in the back, but spread out to the left and right in the parietals. And so those two types of skulls exist in Tiwanaku, but they exist pretty much evenly among the population. There's no one that sticks out among males or females or that kind of thing. It seems to be pretty evenly spaced. But when you start looking at local regions and a couple of different valleys, you start seeing, this elongated front to back one shows up more here, and this oblique one shows up more in this other valley. So it seems to be that the people are coming from these regions, coming to Tiwanaku, and they're displaying their regionality through the skulls. So which is a possibility. It's not set in stone, but that's a very high possibility. So it's pretty interesting. And so these are why archaeologists are interested in these, not necessarily because they're looking for aliens, or they're looking for hybrids, the claims that you hear these people say that these are hybrid beings and Nephilim and that kind of thing. They're just people.
Yes. Yeah, what you're saying makes a lot of sense because it's known in different cultures. Let's say like the Scottish people, they have their tartans, I think is the name of the fabric, of the pattern of the fabric that they use, which is different. So the same thing happens in Guatemala, because I know different Maya clans, let's say, have their own pattern. In probably in South America, the same thing happened. They had their own patterns for their, and then probably, like you said, like the skull shape could be another way to show, we are this group, we are not those guys.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And there are two things that I hear all the time that are part of the, let's say, anomalies of these skulls that supposedly make them non-human or a different kind of humans, according to this pseudo, like scammers, I'm gonna say, or fraud people. They say that there are some sutures, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, on the skulls that are not there.
Yep.
And they also said that the foramen magnum, I think that's the name, which is the part of the skull where it's connected to the spine.
Yep.
They said that it's located on a different position than regular skulls. What do you think about that?
Well, in the case of the missing suture,
mm-hmm.
I could tell you that sutures fuse over time. And it's interesting because I was watching a video where the person was handling, and not so gentle with a skull, just kind of tossing it around and flipping it over, and which I kind of thought was, they didn't seem to be very gentle, but they're handling the skull and they're saying, yeah, it's missing sutures. But I slowed it down and looked, I saw the sutures. Looking at the pictures, I could see that they're just not in the right, they're not in the same place, which I thought was, I was expecting them, sure, to fuse. I wasn't too surprised by that. I mean, futures typically fuse with people as they get older. Not in everyone and not in any specific year, but usually between the age of 50 and 60 years, the sagittal suture will fuse. and it obliterates. It just becomes so fused you can't even tell. You could probably tell microscopically, but with the naked eye or just looking at it, you probably can't see where it used to be. Sometimes they fuse much earlier. Some sutures on the skull can fuse as early as age 18. So it just happens. They do fuse, and if you start applying pressure to the skull, I would guess that's probably going to accelerate the fusing process. That's a normal. The reason why those sutures are there is actually the way that we're able to shape the skull. So as a toddler is young, there's no cartilage in between those. They're actually they have more bones in their skull than we do until they fuse somewhat. And because of that, we're able to, as toddlers, are able to shape the skull to the shape that is desired. And after about 2 years old, you can't do that any longer because they fused a bit. And so I'm going to guess and say, that if you're applying pressure in one direction constantly, that could accelerate that fusing process because you're creating a vector of growth, that could fuse a little bit early. But fused sutures aren't, they're not rare, and we see that in skulls of people who haven't had their heads shaped. So that's not a big deal.
Interesting.
As for foramen magnum, I looked at the skull too, where that claim was being made, and there was a claim that it was larger or something. I've looked at a couple of skulls that I've measured it. I didn't see any indication that it was larger. It is positioned relative. Its relative position is a little bit different to the shape of the skull, but it's still exactly where it's supposed to be. So I think that's a matter. The foramen magnum displaced claim is really just a inability for the person observing it to show careful observation or be consistent in their observations.
Interesting. I don't know if you have any other thoughts about the skull, so we can move to another topic.
Yeah, we did mention, and related to this, I did mention Tiwanaku, and Pumapunku is a temple there, as well as Kalasasaya, and that comes up a lot in the Ancient Aliens. And I think part of the reason why we have things like this show up on shows like Ancient Aliens or in claims, pseudo-archaeological claims, pseudo-scientific claims, is because whenever there's something that's mysterious, the more there is something unknown, the easier it is to insert your opinion on it, and then make that opinion look like a fact. And and so it's really interesting. But there's been a lot of work done at places like Pumapunku and other sites in the Andes, or even in Peru, the Cusco and Sacsayhuaman. There's been a lot of work done looking at megalithic structures, and I know people like to talk about megalithic structures as a way of, this is why the natives, they couldn't have possibly have done this because they're just too big for them to handle. And what I don't understand, I've never understood it, is these are built around the same time as some of the greatest architecture in Europe, and they don't say that these guys couldn't do it.
Exactly.
A lot of the same, they use a lot of same ingenuity and manpower. There is, they got people moving rocks, but yet somehow the browner skinned folks in South America, they couldn't move large andesite stones. I don't know exactly why. It's the same time period. But so in Pumapunku and Tiwanaku, one of the reasons why they pop up a lot is because of some of the work that was done by a guy. They love to say that that Tiwanaku in general is just way older than it really is, and part of this is part of the reason for this is some of the early work done by Arthur Poznański. And this guy, he was using archaeoastronomy to date the Temple of Kala Sisseya that's there at Tiwanaku. And he come up with a construction date of about 15,000 years. And he based that on a phenomenon that's archaeological, or excuse me, an astronomical phenomenon that's kind of related to precession. It's not exactly precession, which precession is just the way the tilt of the Earth kind of wobbles over time. I think it's something like every 26,000 years or something like that. I'm not an astronomer, so I don't keep track of that. Or I write that stuff down so I don't have to remember it. But what he based it on was the obliqueness of the ecliptic, which is really just an easy, quick way of saying, if you can imagine the Earth on that axis that's tilted, picture where the equator is. Picture the equator in relationship to the plane of the Earth as it goes around the sun, and there's an angle between those. And so he's using that angle. This is already really complicated stuff, so he's using that angle to look at alignments of stones on the ground. And what he come up with was, well, there are certain stars that would coincide with a time when the Earth's equator was about 23 degrees, 8 minutes, and 48 seconds oblique to the ecliptic. And that would have been 15,000 years ago. So, you can probably, make some alignments that way, and it would do that. But there's a few problems that really Poznański didn't really consider. And I think not least of which is the disturbance of the site. I mean, he assuming Poznański picked the right stars and the right stones, or assuming he picked the right stars, how do we know he picked the right stones? And so there was a railroad that went through there before he was there in 1943 is when Poznański was there. So before he was there, before the 1920s, there was already a railroad that went through there. And a travel writer by the name of Alpheus Hyatt Verrill wrote about Tiwanaku. And he described the damage of the railroad and locals who stripped away hundreds of statues and stones, and they reused them in the railroad. They cut through the region. They used them for homes and buildings and other structures. So just wholesale removal of statue and monoliths. And you got to figure they moved some of the best ones.
Yeah.
The stone will be perfect here. So if you're trying to construct, sight lines for astronomical alignments, based on what's left, it's got to be purely speculative.
Yeah, it's like you were saying earlier. They start with a conclusion, and then they try to fit whatever is on the ground to their conclusion, and not the opposite way. And also, sorry, and there's a one of the conclusions that I hear the most is what you mentioned about the supposed ancient civilization that existed, like, I don't know, tens of thousands of years ago. And therefore, they're the people who we know that built Pumapunku or worked in Pumapunku. They were not the ones. They had to be like the ancient advanced civilization that was all over the world, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's funny because Poznański was starting he had a conclusion already. And one of his conclusions was that there was a global flood. He's one of those folks that accepted that really happened. And when he was looking at Tiwanaku, he thought what he was describing is a port city. But in reality, I don't believe it is a port city. And archaeologists kind of grown since then. But so he just assumed it was really old to begin with. It had to be because it was more than 6,000 years ago when the earth flooded. And I guess he was trying to redate the flood back to 15,000 years.
Yeah.
but he already assumed that he already had this conclusion that it had to be old,
Mm-hmm.
and so he was looking for things to fit that conclusion. So in what really is being ignored is, and this came a little bit after Poznanski, it was radiocarbon dates. And so radiocarbon dates are the lowest layers of Pumapunku started putting construction begin dates at about 550 AD of the current era. So that's really some of the earliest levels that we have there.
Mm.
And there may be earlier levels, but they're less populated, so they're harder to locate, and they're with less people, less artifacts, less trash, less disturbance. So, but for the Pumapunku and itself, and probably the Kalasasea, right around 550 AD is when we have that really started. And if he had if we had alignments that match that, we could say, oh yeah, these actually corroborate evidence, the hard evidence, but we don't have. I mean, we would still have to say the alignments are still suspect because of the disturbance. We would still have to say that, but we have alignments that are way out of whack, but we have radiocarbon dates that are within the tolerances that that are pretty close to each other. Plus or minus 50, 100 years here and there, but they're spread out. There's quite a few radiocarbon dates. I forget exactly how many, but it was more than a dozen that were done early on.
Yeah, one of the dangers of this kind of this pseudoscience thing is that they, in my opinion, they create some false methods, let's say, of quote unquote research. Like Pumapunku is famous for the huge stone blocks that they have that are carved, and then the experts of these shows go there and look at them, and they say they look machined. They looked like they were carved by using machines, because how can you drill this stone? And it's based on what they think they are looking at. And so they, by like we were talking about, like they make the conclusion that there were machines back then when the blocks were made, and then they tied that to their other conclusion of the advanced civilization that had machines. Or even crazier, I think I heard that guy von Daniken in one of those shows saying that the aliens came and carved the stones with their lasers or whatever technology they have. And then the reason why we can't find any machines or any technology is because the aliens took them back with them in their
took it back with them.
Yeah. So but there's something to say about the skill of the people who made those blocks, because in fact I think that's like it's some kind of a hard kind of stone, right?
It is. Andesite's a very hard stone, and what makes it hard is it's an igneous stone, so it's formed by lava. It's very, very similar to diorite, and diorite is very similar to granite. What the difference between diorite and granite is that diorite doesn't have any quartz in it, where granite has a lot of quartz in it, and quartz has a really high hardness, and so does diorite and andesite. Andesite's an extrusive form of igneous rock, whereas diorite is intrusive. Andesite's extrusive, diorite's intrusive, which means one is extruded from the ground and it cools rapidly, and the other one and it's coarse, and the other one cools a little bit slower and it's not nearly as coarse, but they're both pretty hard. They have feldspar in them, and is one of their main minerals, so they're pretty hard. They're like a 7 on the Mohs hardness scale. So that's something that people like to jump in there. Well, it's a really hard stone. They couldn't possibly have carved it, and yet they did. And it's been shown, which is really interesting. I can't believe it was shown in the 1980s basically you take a hard stone and whack the heck out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can, and just because something is hard doesn't mean that it's impermeable, that you can't break it.
Yeah.
And you can, granite is just as hard. Granite quarries and andesite quarries all over the world, what they do is you get a hole in it, and then you just start driving a wedge and you just keep pounding it. Eventually it fractures.
Mm.
So the stone has a fracture. It's in feldspar, and now I'm starting to get into some of my geology. I did pick up a minor in geology. I started out in geology.
Mm-hmm.
But feldspar and andesite fractures. The feldspar in the mineral that's in the andesite has the way it fractures is by impact, and it's very similar to other really hard things like granite. When you impact it, it can fracture and along lines and create blocks. And so that's essentially what they were doing. They were hammering these rocks, creating blocks and quarries, and then they were moving these. And they actually moved these rocks at Tiwanaku on reed boats. And when I first heard that, I thought, that's kind of crazy. I was a little skeptical myself. And then I watched them do it. They actually they created some reed rafts, experimental archaeology. They created some reed rafts back in the 90s, I think it was, and put these andesite blocks on it. And they actually floated them across Titicaca. And I was just amazed to read about this. It was pretty interesting. And they once they get them in place, then they dress them up. And a guy named Jean-Pierre Protzen, who just recently passed away. He's an archaeological architect. And he started work in the 80s. And he took andesite blocks in Peru and I believe in Titicaca or in Tiwanaku. And he looked at some of the architecture and he replicated how they would do that. Now, he was an older guy. He probably, he was by himself, so he did smaller blocks, but the physics is the same on a smaller block as it is on a huge block. You just have more people.
Mm-hmm.
So he showed how river rocks could be used as hammerstones to pound the andesite blocks into shape. And then you look at the quarries and the stones that are abandoned along the route from the quarries to the temples, say Pumapunku or in Tiwanaku in Bolivia, or in Peru at Sacsayhuaman, in Cusco. You look at the quarries, from the quarries to the temples, there's rocks, that are abandoned along the way, and they were always in the process of doing this construction phase until they were conquered. And and then you look at the temples themselves, and he kind of concluded, looking at all this, he concluded that the rough stones were transported from the quarries to the temples, where they custom fit each one into the next location in the wall. And it was a lot of trial and error. They set it in place, see what worked, pick it up, and then he hammered the heck out of it, set it in place, pick it up, hammer it, and then finally to the point where they get a really tight fit. And that's one of the things you'll see a lot on those shows too. Like, I can't stick my credit card in there.
Yeah. So basically, the advanced civilization that they are talking about, where the Inca, all these people that built all the construction, that all the structures, there's no need to look for an ancient worldwide civilization that was advanced, because this was the advanced civilization, right?
Yeah, they were the advanced civilization. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I remember in my visit to Peru some years ago, I was really surprised to see the canals that carry the water from the glaciers in the mountains, and the water is still running. The water is running, and it's strong. It's not that it's over time. No, it's still running like yesterday, like 100 years ago, like 800 years ago.
And listen to this story of advanced civilization.
Mm-hmm.
In Tiwanaku, the people that lived there, they understood solar technology. I'm not on Ancient Aliens, so Let me explain. So what they did was and this was part of, I think, what Posnanski was observing and making him think that it was a port city. They had these canals that were in a maze and a kind of a labyrinth of canals. And so you have several meters of canal and then several meters of ridge in between the canals, and then more canals. And they were set up in a way that you could walk out on these ridges and plant. And then the canals were shallow enough to accept the sun's rays and heat up, but deep enough that they wouldn't just give off all their heat right away. And so during the day, and you got to remember, Lake Titicaca is at a high elevation. Tiwanaku is at a relatively high elevation. So frost was a big deal. If you're trying to grow something, frost would kill your plants.
Mm-hmm.
What they did was they used the canals to capture this solar energy, and then they grew plants, their crops on these little ridges in between the canals. And then at night, the heat that was given off would keep the frost from setting on the crops. And this is something that was replicated just recently. There's a paper out that I browsed it, but I didn't get a chance to read it in detail. There was a paper out on that. It was just fascinating, the fact that they replicated this, and they mentioned that they were passing this off to the I believe the Amaria local people to continue growing their crops in the traditional way. Now they have a way, and they've embraced that as this is a traditional method, and they should be able to grow some crops there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very high tech and very ingenuity.
Yeah,
it may not be a computer or a laser, but it's a very high tech way of thinking. And these people were scientists. They carefully observe nature and thoroughly observe nature, and then they use consistent logic to evaluate the results enough. Yeah, sure, they had beliefs in different kinds of gods and superstitions, and they did sacrifices and that kind of thing, but they still were able to consistently put to use what they observed about nature into play and create wonderful architecture and grow crops and metallurgy. Oh my gosh, the Moche had a system of metallurgy of gilding gold. Gilding is a way of taking gold and plating it to copper to make it look like it's solid gold. And they had a way of doing this using, I believe it was salt, potassium, and another solution that they created to gild this together. It was just chemistry. And I mean, I'm sure people just tried many, many different things, and it's probably some accident that they noticed that this worked. But my gosh, the beautiful jewelry and things that they created out of it, the figurines that came from that were just wonderful.
Yeah, definitely. We're talking about millions of people, like entire cities, entire like networks of cities, let's say, with roads and everything. They clearly had everything figured out.
Yeah, and a lot of it was just laborious. But what's interesting is that many of these cultures, like the Inca, they had tribute labor, and so they used the labor from conquered people at their disposal. I mean, some of those people got sacrificed, but other ones went to work, and so that was a way of life for them.
Yeah, but these claims, these pseudo claims, always try to give the credit to someone else for the achievements of the indigenous people, as you mentioned earlier in the conversation, and they sometimes mention or find, or let's say, as we were talking about, they start with the conclusion that clearly these people were savages that were not capable of doing this. So where did they get the knowledge from? And then they look for the proof, right? Like the evidence, and they find things like an object that is called, I think, the Magna Bowl.
Right. Yeah.
That supposedly has some Sumerian inscriptions, and that's all they need, like to make their as proof for their claim. And there's no context, there's no history, no timeline, no nothing. But have you heard about the Magna Bowl?
Yeah, the Fuente Magna Bowl.
Fuente Magna, yeah.
It's a fascinating. I love it. I think it's cool. I'd like to have a copy of it, to be honest. I'm fascinated by these little out of place artifacts, and one of these days I want to collect, maybe 3D copies of them all and just and put them on a shelf or something. But this one's actually made out of oh gosh, I'm trying to think what it was. It's a I don't think it's andesite or quartz or anything like that, but it's a hard stone. It's a stone bowl, and it was carved. It was found in Bolivia, and so it's supposedly tied to some of the cultures like Tiwanaku and Pumapunku and that kind of thing. It has several panels of writing on it, but the writing is alleged to be Sumerian or proto. It looks like cuneiform. It has the look of cuneiform. So this is where a lot of the pseudo archaeology comes in. It has that pretend look, and I firmly believe that somebody, some local, created this bowl. It's actually on display too. If you happen to find yourself in La Paz, Bolivia, it's at the Museo de Metales Preciosos in La Paz. So it's a precious metals museum, but it's a stone bowl, so it'll probably stand out if you happen to see it. But I firmly believe that some local made it and was hoping to sell it because he knew that people were looking for this kind of thing. It's really a lot like the Ica stones. These were created the same kind of way. I think they were created in Peru, Ica, Peru, and so they're similar, not too far away. The same kind of thing. People are coming looking for artifacts. And, it's getting to be the point in time when it's illegal. The governments are starting to crack down. You can't just sell artifacts because you can get in trouble. But if I create something, I can create these all day long. I don't have to go look for them. And it's a lucrative career. It's probably pays better than farming.
Yeah. But you mentioned one interesting thing that I didn't know about, which is that the characters on the bowl are carved, and this is a stone bowl, right? Yeah. As opposed to the original Sumerian stuff, which is clay, and it's like I understand that it's some kind of seal that you put on the clay, and then when it dries or you dry it using fire or something, then right?
People did carve cuneiform, but that after, but not a lot. It was easier to, and so the traditional way of creating a cuneiform inscription is to have a soft clay tablet, and then you have a stylus that is kind of triangular shaped. And, you would press it and kind of pull it a little bit to create indentations, and the way you position the indentations created the characters, and each character was kind of analogous to a letter or a syllable, word perhaps.
I see.
And so you could say, you could say a particular word with a group of indentations, and if they were positioned just right, and you saw it that way each time, then that it'd be kind of like a Chinese character in a way. So it can be a letter, or it can be a word or a thought, or
a number.
Or number, yeah. So, and numbers were often really easy because they were often just punctuations, in cuneiform. But you started using it when cuneiform writing really took off. Then people decided they wanted to inscribe stone. Well, they knew how to write in cuneiform, so they would actually etch stone with what looks like cuneiform, but it's still didn't look like anything like this bowl.
Yeah.
so,
Yeah. Yeah.
so this, the bowl was actually created. It was actually found on a pig farm
Hmm.
in Bolivia, and I believe it was the 1940s. I'd have to go back to my notes to really get a solid provenience on it, but
Mm-hmm.
it was supposedly the guy had was feeding his dog in it or pigs in it or something. I don't know.
The pig.
Yeah,
I'm gonna say it in Spanish because I remember that the owner of the bowl called it el plato del chancho, meaning
oh,
the bowl of the pig. That's the bowl where they put the food for the pig. I remember that.
so it makes me wonder, if you found such a thing, you probably wouldn't. But if you created it and you wanted to age it, give it an aged look,
Mm,
wonder how you could do that.
yeah.
You could put it for a while. You could put it in the oven, or maybe you could feed your pigs with it for a while. But,
Yeah. Yeah.
so, so I don't know if that was the case or not. But it has the look of somebody who may have seen a story about cuneiform. And what's fascinating is that in the 1940s and 50s, travel brochures and postcards were all over the place with cuneiform because it was really exciting, the discoveries they were making in the Middle East and Iraq and that kind of thing, in Iran. And, they were really finding really cool stuff and this new writing, and they were cracking the codes, and so it captured people's imagination. There were lots and lots of travel writing stories in newspapers, long serialized newspaper articles, that kind of thing, and they would put pictures of this cuneiform. So it has the look of somebody who knew what cuneiform looked like and may have seen it, but they got it wrong and they didn't have it in front of them. So when you start looking at the panels and breaking it down and start looking at, there are some some symbols that look like the one, you can tell what they're supposed to be, but they're positioned incorrectly.
Mm.
And then there are others that's really way off. And the cuneiform itself is really suspect. I mean, the way it was drawn, because it was etched in stone. So even that's suspect. But most of the time, the symbols are backwards. And so I often wonder if maybe the person who saw that didn't see an image that was accidentally reversed. I know you're into photography, so you would know a film photographer might accidentally get the negative reversed when he made the image and not know it.
Yeah.
And so it's cuneiform. You don't know which way it reads. So
Yeah,
if it was on if it was English text, you'd say, "Oh, that's backwards," right away. But you might not have noticed it. So I'm wondering if it wasn't something like that.
Well, it's interesting because you were talking about the Ica stones, which show the interesting thing about this, and I'm going to talk about them really quick. Is that they show dinosaurs.
Yes. Yeah.
And they, even more interestingly, they show humans riding the dinosaurs, like if they were horses, let's say, like a human sitting on top of the dinosaur and riding it like it was a horse. And this is, I think it's also from the 40s, 50s, maybe 60s, I don't know. But again, like you said, like the people who make the stones makes mistakes because they don't know science, or they make the things according to the knowledge of the time. And back then we didn't know that dinosaurs had feathers.
Right. Yeah.
And now we know it, but they didn't. So they made them without feathers. And and the thing is that it's not just that, it's that there is a guy, his name is Basilios Chuya, who claimed, or who confessed that he made them. And like you said, like they had to age the stone. So he used cow poop basically and baked it in cow poop or something. And if there's a market for them for something, then they will be making more and more and more and more. And you correct me if I'm wrong, but apparently when you find objects that are ancient, it's very difficult to find them in one piece. They are always broken or chipped or something. And
Yes.
in all these stones that they show, they are all pretty neat, like very, not just that, like it's like the stone is like black and the lines are white. And they
Yeah.
are all very nicely, like if they just, made them. So clearly a forgery, I would say, or a
I
fake.
think it was they were using andesite as well,
Mm.
but andesite had a patina on top of it, probably that cow dung.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it had a patina over it, and when they incised it, it created those white lines underneath of it. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I remember as a kid getting a paper like that you could etch, and it was black. And we used to make it with just white paper, and you put black tempera paint on top of it, let it dry, and then you could etch it with a calligraphy pen. That's always reminded me of that when I see those.
Interesting.
Yeah, the Ica stones and the Fuente Magna bowl, they they both strike me as, somebody creating an object to sell to make a little bit of money, and possibly the guy that made the guy who made the Fuente Magna bowl knew about the guys making the Ica. He'd heard about it, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
Wanted to catch.
But there's one thing with the Fuente Magna bowl, which is that there's an American guy who claimed that he deciphered he deciphered the cuneiform.
Yeah, Clyde Winters. He's a former professor of education at Governor State University in Chicago. I don't know what he does now, but he claims that the writing is Sumerian. And then the right side of the bowl, he says, is Sumerian cuneiform, and the left side, he says, is Proto-Sumerian. the problem is that none of the signs match the transliterations that he's given. And he's given some translations for it, and the signs don't match. I mean, you go back and look, and you try to figure out what that should be. Like he's got. Well, this is the word cur, Kur is how, and it's kind of close. I mean, when you look at it, but really it looks, it's supposed to mean foreigner. The word cur is supposed to mean foreigner, or the enemy, or something, depending on the context, but it doesn't. The symbols don't match when his transliteration. So you go back and look at the symbols that are actually there; they don't match. They don't look what you would expect if you look at real cuneiform for Sumerian cuneiform. If you look at the real cuneiform, then the proto stuff, it just isn't proto cuneiform. It's not. It's not. It isn't anything like proto cuneiform. They're just. They look like little animal symbols and that kind of thing. And yeah, true enough. There are some proto-cuneiform was more pictographic than cuneiform was. It was, and that's the way writing developed in the Middle East. It was started out as pictographs, and then it gradually, and hieroglyphs and cuneiform and everything kind of evolved in some of the similar ways. They had pictographs first, and then they became more cuneiform writing or hieroglyphic writing.
Yeah, he also claims that he deciphered the Olmec script, and according to him, he says that it's the same as the Mende from Africa, and again but that's because again he has his conclusion that the Olmec were African, so he's trying to fit the information and making stuff up so that to fit his conclusion or his theories.
And that really is kind of, he ties this Fuente Magna bowl into his African conquest of Central America kind of thing that he's or immigration. And, and it's really hard to when you see people of color using pseudo-archaeology or pseudo-science to promote their point of view, it's hard to debunk that, because part of you is like, they, I don't want to come across as racist myself, but
Exactly.
but it really, but it really is, he's wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
It's around it, he really is just wrong. Uh,
Yeah.
his assessment of all the panels on there, he's got a complete story about what they are. They don't match anything that nobody else seems to agree with his translation. People who actually can read cuneiform, I suspect the same as with his Olmec, his translations. I'd put money on it. It's easy to make things up when things are. And I think this is his point of view. He's like, well, nobody really knows. Like whatever I say is as good as anything else.
Mm-hmm.
But really do know. They've spent a lot of time deciphering, these things and put a lot of effort into learn. People spent their whole careers learning one single, lost language.
Yeah. Yeah. And
That's career. So, and this guy is just, he's just all over the map.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, but so I think we're running out of time. In just to not forget North America. In North America, we also have some pseudo history. Like, for example, I don't know if you've heard about this. This story that in the Grand Canyon, there is a cave, I think they call it Kincaid Cave, where apparently beginning of the 20th century, if I'm correct, there was found like a lot of Egyptian objects.
Yes. Yeah.
And then, so where are the objects? Well, I can show you the objects because the government, the Smithsonian, the Smithsonian came and the government, and they closed the cave because they know that if they open it, and if they, like, apparently it's an area of the Grand Canyon that is not open for people. If they open it, then the whole everything is gonna the whole archaeology history is gonna be disrupted, and it's gonna be a chaos. I don't know. Have you what do you think about that? Like, how can we analyze, let's say, an idea like this, that there's some objects in the Grand Canyon that are Egyptian, and how can we, let's say, prove that that is a completely crazy idea?
Well, I think the lack of evidence is the first thing that is kind of telling. So any claim that is any assertion that's really put forth without evidence can be dismissed equally.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Without that evidence, you can dismiss it just as equally. So, I mean, there's that. But if such a thing were true, there'd be some reason to say it was true. And there are people who have, and I think I've read some of the stories of this from the newspaper clippings from 1800s, that kind of thing. And there was a practice in the 1800s of creating news to sell papers. I know that's foreign. That's probably, you would never think anybody would ever do such a thing, but they actually did create. They made up things to sell papers. There was even underneath St. Louis is supposed to have a city underneath it, apparently. So, or another. I think it's St. Louis. I have to go back and look at where I read that at. But these. This was completely made up, and it was a hoax, and it was an admitted hoax. So I don't know if that was the same case with the Grand Canyon story or not. But yeah, it'd be hard to keep something like that a secret. Mm-hmm. It's a huge undertaking, and the Smithsonian really isn't that big. It's made of people.
Yeah,
there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of employees that currently work at the Smithsonian. There's thousands that have worked there, and I'm sure somebody would be willing to leak that, because it's a career maker if you can prove it. So yeah, it doesn't seem to be. It has a lot of problems just on the face, prima facie. You know, there's, you know, how the Egyptians get there? What was their method? What, you know, why there? Why not the East Coast? Why
Exactly.
why not on the coast of the West? If they came from the other way, why not just stop at the coast?
Yeah.
You know, that's so there's a lot of missing pieces. You know, with a story like that, I think you know, and these are all fun. I mean, they make great science fiction. I was one of those guys who loved to watch Stargate. One of my favorite science fiction shows of the 20th century, 21st century, Stargate. I miss it, but it didn't really happen. They didn't land spaceships on the pyramids, and there's no ring gate. There's none of that stuff really happened.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's fun science fiction, though. I love it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, my thing with this Egyptian claim is that if they landed on one of, let's say, on the west coast of the United States or Mexico, and they made their way all the way from there to the Grand Canyon, it's not that they had a purpose to go to the Grand Canyon, you know, like a hole.
They heard that it was you know, it was a huge canyon that you have to see before you die.
Yeah, exactly. But they would have like settlements, you know, from there all the way to the Grand Canyon or something, you know, leave clues, you know, every
it'd be something.
Yeah.
Especially if you know, and the stories I've heard about this is supposed to be full of treasure. There's always treasure involved.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
it was supposed to be full of gold and treasures and things like that. You know, why bring it? Why would you? Why would you put that? I mean, the Egyptians at that time, their boats were notoriously bad. The last thing you want is the heaviest objects of the most wealth you have on your boat. You want to keep it light and keep it simple. Let's take fresh water. Let's take food.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Maybe change clothes.
Yeah. Well, this has been a very interesting conversation, and as usual, we didn't even start to talk about so many quote unquote mysteries, and you know, so maybe we can have another talk where we can analyze other stuff. But to conclude, I would like to remember the audience about your blog. They can find it under archaeology review, and the address is ahotcupofjoe.net, right?
Ahotcupofjoe.net, which is a cup of coffee. So
yes,
I've been writing on this blog for over 15 years, and this has been probably the slowest year in a while. You would think sitting at home I'd have nothing better to do but write on his blog, but I've actually been pretty busy with work. But you give me some homework. I think I may have to write an article about the Egyptian thing. But ahotcupofjoe.net, and or you could look for archaeology review, all one word, .com. It'll point.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for being here. I don't know if you have some final words for the audience, or
no, it's been fun. I've really enjoyed it, and I'd be happy to do it again.
Excellent. So Carl has in his blog, like, all these things that we've been talking about, and even more, if someone is interested in you know, finding about all this pseudoscience and debunking. And there's one of the things I have found with Carl is that he's very into the research, and everything has to be backed up. Everything that he puts there has to have a support, and it's documented and stuff. And so thank you, Carl. I have to finish, and we'll be in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great night.